pals, I'm here today to talk about 13 books I read in the month of February. So I've got loads of reading on in February. I'm surprised I managed 13 books in the shortest month of the year, but also quite a few of those books were really long. One of them was 850 pages. And yeah, just really happy, really enjoyed all my reading. I think sort of combo of two things. Johnny and I have just both really been enjoying doing our own things in the evening. So Johnny's been obsessed with this new video game that came out recently, and I've been obsessed with reading. So we've spent a lot more time doing those things rather than like watching TV or playing board games together. And then also we both got COVID in February. We're both fine now. In fact, Johnny felt fine throughout having it. He just tested positive. Whereas I did feel unwell, but I was off work for a week. But there was only like sort of one day within that week where I felt like so unwell I didn't want to read, and the rest of the time I was just reading more like genre fiction that was sort of easier to get through. So yeah, managed to read a fair amount. What I'm going to do is I've got 6 books that I don't have physical copies of because 5 of them are from the library and I've returned them, and one of them is an audiobook, and then the other 7 I have here, so I'll talk about them afterwards. So firstly, in January I did a TBR video for 12 epic fantasy books I wanted to read this year to get me back into epic fantasy, and I've already read 3 of them in February, which I'm very pleased with, and I'm currently reading the 4th. So once I finish the 4th one, I'm going to do a wrap-up video of those 4, and then I'll do that every time I finish 4th on the list, which I'm hoping I might do by halfway through the year and then be able to do another TBR, which would be fun, but we shall see. So those 3 books were, and the order I read them is my order of enjoyment as well. So the first one is Jade City by Fonda, which I think I'd end up giving like 2 stars to. I just think that the writing style is pretty weak, and it's not the type of fantasy I enjoy, in that it doesn't have like a quest narrative, and also it has guns and cars, and I prefer fantasy that feels a little bit more removed from our world. But yeah, I can sort of see what people like about the plot and the characters, but I just think the writing is pretty weak. So I think I'll still carry on. I read this with Johnny and he enjoyed it a lot more than I did, and I've heard lots of people say that the next books are stronger, so we'll see. The next one is The Ember Blade by Kristen. This is the book I read like during COVID. It's 850 pages, quite small text, and I think I read it in like 4 days. I just stormed through it, and I gave this 3.5 stars. For the first half, it felt like it maybe could be like a 4.5, 5 star. So I was loving it. It's really reminiscent of like classical fantasy. It really reminds me of Lord of the Rings, to be honest. But it's got sort of this new spin, which I admired, but maybe made me enjoy it a little bit less, which I'll talk more about in that video. And then the final one, which I really enjoyed, was Black Sun by Roanhorse. I'm really glad, because as soon as I finished it, I looked up when the next one was out, and it's out next month, so I haven't got to wait that long. And yeah, really enjoyed it. The only thing that stopped me from giving this one 5 stars is it's quite a short epic fantasy, I think maybe 400 pages in the UK edition. And I just felt like I'd like a bit more context for like the religious and political history of this world. And I felt like that was brushed over a little bit lightly. And maybe we'll get more of that in future books, but I like to be very like grounded in my fantastical world and really understand it right from the start. So that was the only thing. Other than that, I loved it, and I thought it was super interesting and really loved the characters, and can't wait to get back to them. And then I heard Claire talk about Last Night by McFarlane, and it's like I guess it is a romance novel, but I'd say it owes more to like contemporary women's fiction than romance, in that whilst there is a romance plot, it's also just about this woman's life. And yeah, it doesn't feel as driven by this romantic relationship as a lot of the other romance books I've read. I heard Claire talk about this one. I like the sound of it, so I reserved it at the library. I read it in one evening on like the day when I was feeling my absolute worst, and really enjoyed it. Didn't go where I was expecting it to go. There was lots of interesting discussions within it, and I just really liked it. So like, I never really give romance reads more than 4 stars. This is probably a 3 stars, in that I don't think the writing style was you know, super special, and I didn't feel like a connection personally to the narrative, but I definitely want to carry on reading her books, and I found this really like comforting, so that was good. And then the other one I borrowed from the library was Julia and the Shark by Kiran, Milwood, Hargrave, and this is illustrated by Tom DeFreston. This was lovely. I gave this 4 stars. This is a children's book about a young girl whose mother is a marine biologist, and she wants to find this specific whale. I think they go up to Scotland and they stay in a lighthouse. Her father is some type of engineer who makes lighthouses automatic. So he's sent there to do that, and while they're there, her mother is trying to find this shark, and so she's going travelling in a sort of small fishing boat with radar, sonar, trying to find this shark. And it's about friendship and judgment and mental health. This deals with some quite difficult themes for children, but I think it does it beautifully, and I love the illustrations. I would definitely read Kiran Milwood Hargrave's other middle grade novels. I think she has one or two which I haven't read, and I would definitely pick them up. I could maybe have given it 5 stars, but it was just a bit longer. I'd have happily had like a bit more story and a bit more time for the development, but I still really enjoyed it and would highly recommend it. And then the audiobook I listened to was Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So I loved Braiding Sweetgrass last year, which I listened to on audio, and when I looked, Robin Wall Kimmerer also narrates Gathering Moss herself on audio. Now this is a much shorter book, it's around 180 pages. Braiding Sweetgrass is much longer, and this book came out first. So what I'll say is, now I think to myself I probably should have read Gathering Moss first, because Gathering Moss focuses on moss. So each chapter looks at a different type of like fascinating moss in different parts of the world, predominantly in North America, where sort of Robin Wall Kimmerer has been able to go and actually document them herself. And then she does what she does in Braiding Sweetgrass, and that she tells her about her life along the way, but a little bit less, and there's definitely less of an overarching commentary within Gathering Moss. And you can just tell that this is the first one, and that Braiding Sweetgrass has like really built on that idea, and also just expanded it across the whole of the ecosystem rather than specifically on mosses. So I definitely enjoyed it. I think it would have been better to read them the other way around. And the one sort of personal critique I have of this, which I struggled with, is that there's a chapter where she's focusing on mosses that are on the land where she lives. And she talks a lot about her neighbour, who is a dairy farmer. And she mentions how much better like this sort of dairy farming is to the big industries. I'm a vegan, so I don't agree with any type of dairy farming. I think it's wrong to, to forcefully impregnate an animal in order to, when their child is born, take them away from them in order to then take their milk so that we can drink it and their baby can't. So I don't agree. But that comes up a lot in books, and I get it. But then in the next chapter, there was a chapter about this secretive millionaire who was building a house with a fancy golf course, and he hired Robin Wall Kimmerer to come and give advice about how they could make all the rocks on the land on the golf course look hundreds of years old, look like they've been there for ages. And her advice was effectively, you can't. And then a year later they invite her back to be like, look, we managed it. And she's amazed at all these beautiful mosses. And it turns out that they found an area locally with these gorgeous mosses, and they hired an explosive expert and exploded the rock face and moved the rocks. And the reason they've actually called her back is because the mosses are immediately dying, because they've been moved out of this environment they've been comfortable in for hundreds of years, and they want her to advise on how to save these mosses. And she writes this beautifully eloquent statement about how, as man, we're so obsessed with owning something and something being ours, and trying to own the natural world is like disgusting, and like moving this moss and disturbing it is abhorrent to her. And I completely agreed, but couldn't see how you could feel that way about mosses, but not about a sentient being such as cows. So that's just like a personal thing that really irked me. But other than that, I would like recommend this, and I found it an interesting read, and there was lots of fun facts about moss. Okay, so now moving on to the 7 books I do have physically, and this first one is an advanced reader's copy I was sent by the publisher. This is Hare House by Sally Hinchcliffe, and this came out in January. And this was a super quick read. I read this in like 2 sittings. Sadly, I didn't love it. And this is always one I was dubious about, because I feel like this blurb is going to sound quite familiar to you. So, this is set in present day, and we're following a woman who was a all-girls school teacher. Something happened, which we don't know because she won't really reveal to us. And so she's decided to relocate to this remote Scottish cottage that she is renting off the rich estate owner. And as she gets there and winter starts to close in, weird stuff starts to happen. She starts to distrust her neighbours, particularly the estate owners, and there's lots of sort of whispers of secrets that result in people's deaths, and also of witches, and you don't know who to trust. You have no idea that this woman isn't likeable at all. You start to uncover the reason she left this all-girls school, and she's, you know, you don't admire her for it, let's put it like that. So I feel like this sort of story, unreliable narrator, remote location, possible witchcraft, we hear that a lot, and I'm always excited because I love those things, but I want them to be done well. And I want them to be a little bit original because they're done so much. I would say this book is a blend of Notes on a Scandal, which I haven't read but I have seen the film, and The Little Stranger. And I'd say that both of them are significantly better than this. You know, this is well written, but it's not particularly special. And I felt like I could see where the end was going, and I was right. And I also think, and I saw quite a few people say this in their reviews, that once you know the ending, there's just certain elements of this plot that don't make sense. There was like scenes where I was like, well, I thought I was going to understand how that had physically happened, and I still don't really. It doesn't really make sense. So yeah, it felt like we were given lots of these little like hints of witchcraft, which at the reveal at the end didn't really come full circle. So I gave this one 2 stars. Like, it was a fine read and I sped through it, but it's not one I would run around recommending to people and saying, oh, you must read this. I would say read The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. Then I read 2 other recent releases that are both short story collections. The first one, 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King, I was kindly sent from the publisher. And this was a really mixed bag because I've read Euphoria and Writers and Lovers by Lily King and really enjoyed both of them. I think she's a great writer. And when I read the first short story in this, which is called Creature, I absolutely loved it. Like, for every single word was perfection, and I can't even put my finger on what it is about Lily King's writing style. It feels really precise, like every word makes sense. I can picture a scene within like 2 sentences of her describing it. So this story was set in Maine, if I'm remembering correctly, and we're following a teenage girl who's I think around 14 or 15, and she is asked to go and babysit for a sort of wealthy family who live in this much bigger house, and when she gets there, the sort of uncle of these children arrives, and there's a sort of tension between the 2 of them, and it's about how she sort of copes with that, and like a loss of innocence, and her sort of deciding how to deal with it, really. I don't want to spoil anything. And I love stories about young girls, as you know. I love stories set in big old houses where there was historically money but may not be anymore. So it had all those elements that I loved. But she just writes perfectly, so I adored that. And then a couple of stories after that, 5 Tuesdays in Winter, which is the title story, or the titular story I should say, is a little bit sentimental, but I still enjoyed it. And When in the Dordogne, is that how you say it? I don't know. I really love that, and there is a paragraph in that at the end. I don't want to say what it is because it will spoil it. I just thought it was really beautiful. These felt really filled with grief and nostalgia and acknowledgement of a loss, but like still recognising the beauty of having had it, if that makes sense. And so I loved those first few, and then I did find a few of them a little bit more mediocre, and I just think it's because those first few worked so well for me. So I gave this 4 stars in the end because it had some absolute blinders, but I almost wish that they'd just taken a few stories out of this collection and allowed it to be just the absolute bangers. So there's that. And I looked into Lily King afterwards and realised that she has a book called Father of the Rain, which sounds like it might be more of an extended version of Creature, so I'm 100% going to pick that up soon and read that one. And the next one, I read a lot of pink books this month, which is cute, and they're all stacked up together, is Send Nudes by Saba Sams. So what I know about this collection is the first book by a young British author. I think she's like in her mid-20s, and all of these stories are told from the perspective of young girls or sort of teenage girls or women in their early 20s. And a lot of the stories were a discussion about like the power that women can either retain or choose to give away, whether willingly or you wouldn't choose to give it away unwillingly, but you know what I mean. And I read the first 3 stories and they were all about women, I guess in their late teens, early 20s, and they all had an element of hope but were all overall fairly bleak. And I thought they were very well written stories, but I didn't necessarily like love them. And then I had COVID and like put this down for ages, and like I said, was just reaching for easier books. And then I had 2 days left of the month and I was like, I really want to finish this before the end of the month. And I sped through it. I really loved lots of the following stories, and that's not to say the first few aren't good because they're really strong, but I think just as a reader, I always love reading about young girls. We're talking girls like of the age of like 14 and under, and probably 3 of my favourite stories were from the perspective of young girls. So one of them was Flying Kite, which was from the perspective of a young girl who was being fostered, and sort of her fear that the little boy she was being fostered with might be adopted and she might not, and like why her mother didn't want to get her back. And quite a few of these stories we have women who identify as fat or young girls who identify as fat, and I really appreciated that as part of the stories, so I just don't feel like we get that often enough, particularly from young children, so I really liked that in Flying Kite. The mothers and the girls I thought was great. That was about 2 young girls, I think they're around 14, whose mothers are acrobats and they travel around all the festivals in the UK in the summer and just sort of leave the girls for their own devices. We follow these girls for this festival at the weekend as they try and both win the affection of this older boy at the festival. And then probably my favourite one from the whole collection was Blue Forever, which is about a young girl who goes on holiday with her mum and her new stepdad and her new stepsister who's much older than her, and her stepsister has her friend Blue visit. And Blue is super magnetic, she sort of draws everyone to her and manages to get both the sisters to sort of do things and be people they perhaps wouldn't otherwise. But she really inspires our narrator to sort of believe in her own power. And I just thought it was beautiful. Saying that, there's also some in here, particularly Send Nudes and Bread, which I thought were excellent. So, and they weren't about young girls, they were about women, and I just thought brilliant. So like, whatever she brings out in the future, I'll definitely read it. And yeah, I would highly recommend this if you like any of the topics I just discussed. I think I'll talk about this one next because this is also about young girls and sort of friendship in adolescence. And that is We Run the Tides by Vendella Vida. I discussed this in a recent video which I'll link up above, so I won't talk about this too much here. I ended up giving this 3 stars, although at the start I felt like it was going to be a solid 4-star. This is set in the mid-80s in the San Francisco Bay Area. We follow these 2 girls who are really good friends who go to an all-girls private school. And the girl who's telling the story is super obsessed with her best friend. She always calls her by her full name, forename and surname, which like gets her maybe a little bit irritating by the end of the book. But the premise of this is that her friend again is super magnetic. She's sort of developing before the other girls are, so they're all sort of want to be her, and if they can't be her they want to be near her and want to be adored by her. And they're all sort of watching her to know what they should do next, to be like a successful girl and woman. And something happens, which I don't really want to spoil, but it is sort of like a crime, and our protagonist has a different view on that crime than her best friend. And that really sort of fractures not only their relationship, but our protagonist's, I guess, view on the power that her friend holds and the ways in which society at large will view young girls and will believe or disbelieve them. And all that sounds fascinating, but what I found was that once that plot got going, it just lost a little bit of the strength, because I really liked just the slice of life aspect of the initial bit of the novel. And I found a couple of the bits towards the end, I don't know, like, I didn't grow up in San Francisco in the 1980s, right, so I can't be sure, but There is a scene in this where the girls are interviewed by the police without their parents present, and I don't think their parents know they're being interviewed by the police. They're also interviewed by journalists without an adult present, and also like some pretty awful stuff happens and their parents just let them go to school the next day without actually discussing it with them. And I know some parents would do that, but the way her parents come across is that they wouldn't do that, so it just struck as untrue to me. And I think those things allowed the plot to get crazier, but just didn't make sense to me as a reader. So I gave this one 3 stars in the end, but there's definitely elements of just the description of the time and place that I really enjoyed. Now I have another non-fiction I read this month, and this was a 5-star prediction, and in the end I gave this 4 stars, so I was a bit gutted. And that is The Yellow House by Sarah M. Broom. So initially, I read the first chapter and I was like, absolutely fucking amazing. This is definitely a 5-star read, like, well done me for predicting. And I felt like that for the first 200 pages, which is the first half of the book. And then I very much stopped feeling like that for the second half. And initially I thought it was because I was trying to read this book when I still felt a bit unwell, and it is a very serious and thoughtful book. So I stopped reading it and then picked it back up at the end of the month and still felt that way. So I think it was just that the first half really worked between, the second didn't as much. So if you don't know, this is a memoir, and it is about Sarah M. Broom. She is the 12th daughter of her mother, Ivy May. And her mother raised all of her children in a house called the Yellow House in New Orleans East. And that house was wrecked by Hurricane Katrina. But what the author does is she goes all the way back to the birth of her grandmother, and she tells the family story following the maternal line down to herself. So the first 200 pages are following mainly her mother from the age of when she has her first child, which is I think when she's about 18, all the way up to when she has her last child, which is when she's in her early 40s. And just following how she raises all these children in this house and the things she has to do to be able to manage and to care and provide for this many children, and the death of her husband, and yeah, all these people who come together to form this family. And in large part it's this discussion about the house, and how the house is like this 13th child that is always in constant disrepair, but Ivy May has a lot of pride about the fact that she owns this house and it's hers. And there's a lot of discussion sort of between 150 and 200 pages about this pride they have in the house, but also this deep shame, and how they won't let anyone outside the family come into the house because they present as very well put together. They're always very well dressed, always really clean and smart, and the house is always really clean, but it's got like holes in the roof, holes in the floor, there's a bathroom they never use because it's scary and things like that. And so I thought that was all beautiful, and I loved all of that. But then you get to the section where Hurricane Katrina happens, and I think as soon as you, for me, remove Ivy May from the story and them all being children, I thought I'd find that section fascinating and I enjoyed it, but it just didn't have the beauty of the first section, which was, I felt, really filled with love. And I saw this in some people's reviews. The second section is much more about the fact that Sarah M. Broom feels so inherently from New Orleans East, but then leaves it and lives in New York a lot, and moves around the world in different places. And then whenever she comes back to New Orleans, people say, oh, you're obviously not from here. And again, this battle of pride and shame in being from New Orleans East. And I guess that second half just felt like, it felt like how the author feels, which is more at sea, lonely, sad, disconnected. So it was just a lot sadder and more disconnected to read than that first half, which felt so full of beauty and love. So I really admired this. I think it's entirely what she set out to do, but I think I'd just have been more happy to have it feel more like the first half. I will say, the way she writes about New Orleans East I found deeply fascinating. This isn't just a memoir, you know, she pulls lots of facts about the area. If you don't know, and I didn't know, New Orleans East is an area you'll never see advertised for tourists to visit. It's incredibly different from what we think of when we think of New Orleans, and because of that the local council just don't put any money in it, and it was hit incredibly badly by Hurricane Katrina, and the money just has never been put back into the area to help it. And so all of that was so interesting and so infuriating. But like I said, for me, the first half just worked a lot more than the second. But I would 100% pick up whatever this author releases in the future because it was still a 4-star read for me. Okay, last two. I swear we're nearly there. I read this one right at the start of the month, I think in the first 2 days of the month, so I'm going to have to remind myself a bit, although I do remember this pretty well actually, and that is With Teeth by Kristen and Arnett. I have not read this author's first novel, which is called Mostly Dead Things, but I really want to. I really enjoyed this. I think this has got quite low ratings on Goodreads. For me, this was a 4-star read. I found this super readable. I read this in like 2 sittings, and I get that the protagonist is super unlikable. She's an incredibly judgy person, you cannot trust her, but yeah, I just found this really compulsive and readable, and I thought it was asking interesting questions. So the premise of this is that we are being told this from the perspective of Sammy, and she is a predominantly a stay-at-home mum for her son, who's called Samuel. Yes, Samuel. And her wife is the breadwinner, and her wife sort of holds the role of the traditional, like, patriarchal role in the family. And a large part of this novel is twofold, really. One of the questions is that Sammy thinks that Samuel is like a super messed up kid. She thinks he's like inherently evil, and she essentially regrets having him, and her wife doesn't see it. Like, her wife just thinks that she's going mad and sort of leaves her alone to navigate these feelings. But secondly, it's this discussion about the fact that they're a queer family, particularly 2 women raising a son, and so there's this question of, well, do they know what they're doing because they don't have that experience of having lived as a boy and then a man? So that judgment already from sort of straight families. But secondly, the fact that they also feel like they've let their queer community down because, other than the fact that they're 2 women, they live what we would expect from the straight life. You know, one of them is the stay-at-home mum who maybe sort of resents her lot and feels like her whole being has been swallowed by her child, and the other one is out at work all the time, stays out late for meals, says stuff like, well, I'm the one who brings the money in, so I'm the one who pays for it, and things like that. And so they inhabit this sort of straight dynamic, but yet aren't, and so are sort of given up from both parts of the community. And I just found all those questions about if their family were queer enough, but also like, is Samuel messed up or is it Sammy? Fascinating. And this is super messy, okay? So it gets messier towards the end, which I think people found annoying. I didn't. I just found this compulsive. Like, I was here for the mess and the drama. And also, the one thing I will say about this is it does end like maybe a little bit abruptly, and I did feel like I wanted maybe a bit more of an answer about who was the bad one out of Sam and Samuel. But I think maybe that was the point, in that like there wasn't supposed to be an answer. So I'd highly recommend this, and I definitely want to read Mostly Dead Things. Now we're finally on the last book, which is a chunky one, and that is Love Marriage by Monica Ali. So I reserved this at the library. There was a massive queue, so I caved and bought myself a copy, and I'm really glad I did. This author wrote Brick Lane, which was long-listed, maybe even shortlisted for the Booker Prize years ago, and so I was expecting this to be a little bit different to it is. And what I mean by that is, I think when something's longlisted or shortlisted for the Booker, I assume that it's going to be quite literary and maybe a book you want to read a little bit slower, and this isn't that at all. This is super compulsive, filled with plot, and would be an amazing book club read. So I had a blast reading this. It was super fun, and like initially I was like, oh, this is like a little bit more commercial than I was thinking, and I was a little bit thrown, but then I just loved all the drama, and I was just super intrigued by it all. She's an amazing writer. You can just picture every single scene, and like really made me feel everything she wanted me to feel, so I really enjoyed it. What's it about, I hear you ask? So this is a contemporary novel, predominantly told in close third person from Yasmin's perspective. She is a woman in her mid-20s who is raised in an Indian family where her mother is sort of strict Muslim, but her father doesn't really adhere to the faith, and neither does Yasmin. And she is marrying a young white man, and they are planning to get married in a registry office, and it's the moment where her parents need to meet her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law is a famous radical feminist who has had like pictures of her fanny out there in the world. So she is like, oh my god, this is going to be awful, like my family is super conservative, they won't even watch people kissing on the television, this is going to be horrendous. And it sort of is, but in entirely the other way. So like this meeting happens in like chapter 2, and what actually happens is her mother-in-law decides to like railroad them into having a traditional Muslim wedding. And everybody in this book is pretty complex and multifaceted, and there's reasons to like and not like them. The mother-in-law I found pretty unbearable. In particular, it feels a little bit like she wants them to have this traditional Muslim wedding so she can sort of virtue signal to everybody she knows that like she's super left-wing and like super open, and God, look at me with this like Muslim daughter-in-law, like, oh, you know, I'm amazing. So it feels really horrible that she's sort of trying to use them. And then the book is really following these two marriages, one being Yasmin's parents' marriage, which she is convinced was a love marriage, which we as the reader immediately know wasn't. And I could pretty much guess like where it had gone from the start, but you're sort of watching Yasmin's mother start to find more freedom through her connection with Yasmin's soon-to-be mother-in-law, and you're also watching as Yasmin starts to learn more and more about her mother-in-law. But it's also about this soon-to-be marriage, and we are also getting to see the therapy sessions that her fiance is having with his therapist, where we're sort of being let in on a secret that Yasmin doesn't know. It's all super juicy gossip, everyone's fascinating. The brother has a side story which I really enjoyed. Yasmin and her fiance and her father are all doctors, and she works for the NHS. And I loved all the scenes in the hospital. I thought they were really beautifully done. Just, God, yeah, just a real insight to what it must be like to be a doctor in the NHS, and how heartbreaking and frustrating it must be. There's a really great sex scene in this, which me and my friend were talking about, which if you've read it, you know. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Yasmin is not a particularly likeable character, and predominantly you are watching her as a reader with your head in your hands, just being like, Yasmin, like, wake up, stop being so goddamn self-centered, and open your eyes that people around you have so many facets to their life that you are not privy to. But it's sort of brilliant to watch all that happen as the reader. So I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars, and this would just be an excellent book club pick, so definitely pick it for your book club. So yeah, so I feel like I had a really successful month because I just read lots of different types of books, but also I think predominantly I gave lots of books 4 stars, which I was really pleased with. So yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were on them. Let me know if I've convinced you to pick any of them up, and also feel free to let me know if you've read any books recently that you think I'll enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.